The title of my talk is Imagining the Potential, Wood Culture, Sustainability, and Social Responsibility. Let me tell you, I can do a lot of imagining, particularly being here today with with such a distinguished group of people and a great group of artists. Now, I realize there's nothing more worse as a speaker than to be the last person of the day before you get to relax and unwind. So I promise you that I won't talk any longer than about an hour and a half. And is that about my allowed time? Yeah, okay. You know, when this first started, Peter, you were up here, and I think one of the first sentences you said through the microphone was, it's hard to celebrate wood is good when forests aren't healthy. And I really do see some potential to bridge that contrast, and I think the potential exists here and in some of the other activities I've been involved with. Imagining the potential, wood culture, sustainability, and social responsibility. I think that we have some things we can talk about for future steps that come under that category of across boundaries that are listed in your agenda. First, a little background. I spent 37 years with the U.S. Forest Service. Forest Service is very much focused on the interests of public and private lands in the United States and across the world. If you're looking at this map, the Forest Service, the forested areas of the United States in the West, the vast majority of those forested areas are public lands administered by the United States Forest Service. In the East, the vast majority of the lands are private lands with pockets of Forest Service ownership there. Interestingly enough, 100 years ago, the healthy forests were out west due to a variety of factors, insect and disease attack, catastrophic wildfire, climate change. That situation is reversed. The forests of the eastern United States have regenerated, and the healthiest forests in the United States are in the east. The United States Forest Service is a very broad organization. There's several parts of that group. The Forest Service administers 121 national forests, 192 million acres. There's a forest and rangeland research organization that Howard is part of for a long time. Steve did some service in that group. It consists of 80 experimental forest and range units and has a worldwide standing in forest and rangeland research. We have a state and private arm that is focused on supporting tribal, state, and private land ownerships. And then there's an international program that's currently working in 59 countries. Here's the countries they're working with in Africa, and if you go on the website, you'll see the emphasis from Mali to Madagascar, advancing forest sustainability. So there's been a major transition in the United States Forest Service, and that was really a key component of some of the mental focus that has really brought me to where I am today. About 20 to 25 years ago, the Forest Service was all about timber production. For a variety of reasons, domestic, global, economic, and environmental, that transition rapidly changed to a focus on forest restoration and community involvement. A major change from timber industry to smaller forest products industry, a focus on restoration, water quality, habitat, and improving overall forest and rangeland health, and a very strong commitment to working with local communities. And that has resulted in a major transition in my mind. Barry showed the slide, I think probably most of you have seen before, the tip of the iceberg. I had functioned in that tip of the iceberg in my career in the U.S. Forest Service, and my exposure to the International Wood Culture Society really has raised that iceberg out of the water. As a result of this transition I talked about in the Forest Service, I basically have become aware of an entire subculture in the United States that I really paid no attention to or even knew existed prior to this time. And that subculture of wood-dependent wood artistry is very varied, from aspen furniture to guitar making to tool making to maple syrup, horse logging, and all kinds of woodcraft that a very significant portion of people in the United States work with. And I also have become associated with a nonprofit called Greenwood, and they have a very specific focus on bringing artists together with dependent and or indigenous communities with the goal of creating and meeting market demands for products based on sustainable practices. And that's really where my imagination takes off. So here's the question I would ask. What if we could take the vast array of nonprofits, philanthropy organizations, and governments and combine them with the specialized skills of artists worldwide, several of them right here in this event today. What if we could merge that with a strong business and market sense to improve the overall standing of communities that are dependent or indigenous to forested landscapes? So is this possible? There are any number of nonprofits, many more than you see here on this slide. The Greenwood one right there on their logo is training artisans, building businesses, and saving forests. So are there examples of where this could work? Let me just refer to Greenwood again. We do have a challenge to overcome, and the executive director of Greenwood, for example, had told me one time that forest managers know very little about wood artistry. Wood artists know very little about forest management. I think that Mr. Beekman, I had to leave, I think his presentation addressed that. He made a very deep connection between the artistry and the specifics of forestry. But it's an example of something that if we can overcome that barrier, we might be able to make some significant social responsibility progress. So, are there some examples of this? Well, I think there are, and in fact, they go back a long way. In the late 1500s, Jesuit priests working in South America came to Bolivia, and one of the things that resulted from that is they instructed the Guayaro natives in making violins. Today, some of the best violins in the world are made in Urubamba, Bolivia. There's a thriving university there that teaches music, and I'm told in the evenings, if you're dining out at the restaurants in Urubamba, Bolivia, you'll hear Baroque music coming through the marketplaces of that town. Well, this is an example certainly that sustainability wasn't a focus on, but it still is an historic example of bringing a skill that developed a business and a market for the future. So are there some examples today? Let me refer you to a company called Taylor Guitars. Taylor Guitars is the third largest producer of guitars in the United States. My understanding is that they are the preferred guitar maker for particularly acoustic musicians. Steve, as a musician, is shaking his head up and down. Mr. Taylor, who is in the upper left here, has really jumped into this feat first. Now he's has got a deep commitment to sustainable practices. Certainly he has been, there's been some incentive because his main competitor, Gibson Guitar, is facing major fines for not complying with what's in the United States, the Lacey Act and the CITES Treaty relative to the trade of mahogany and related species. So Mr. Taylor wants to avoid that, and if you go to his website, you'll see quite a bit of discussion about his commitment to sustainable practices. But what's interesting about this, these guitars, some of the well-known musicians in the United States, Lucas Hogue, Taylor Swift, many others use Taylor guitars. What he has done is agreed to work in Honduras to take his technical craftsmen from his factory in Southern California bring them to Honduras and work with the community of Madeira. The Forest Service has provided some upfront money for technical assistance and equipment, and then Greenwood has coordinated this, and Taylor has agreed to buy all the mahogany that they can produce using the sustainable practices specified by forest managers and forest experts around across the globe. He is also, this over here is a picture of some people in the Madeira on donkey hauling mahogany cants to the mill that they have set up to cut the parts to the specification for shipping back to the Taylor Guitar Company. But Taylor has also purchased just recently an ebony mill in Cameroon, where he's intending to do exactly the same thing. So it's one example today. Another example today is in Peru and central Amazonia. A chainsaw artist, probably one of the best chainsaw artists in the United States, is donating his time to develop chainsaw artistry skills in central Amazonia in Peru. And there's a little example of his chainsaw work in the lower right. I don't know how you can possibly do that, but this is Mr. Sells working with people in central Amazonia, creating large bowls that are being exported to markets around the country. And it's another example of taking technical expertise, funding from a nonprofit, and developing market and business skills in local communities. So, as I came to this session today and looking at the themes and the cross boundaries label for the agenda, and I see these titles: sustainable development, biodiversity, conservation, cultural values, international markets, across boundaries, all that was part of this program. I wonder, as we step out into the future and plan the next steps for future Wood Days or for future coordinating of this incredible expertise that we've got sitting in this room or out there in the yard, coordinating that with other nonprofits to really make a difference for some of our communities depend on forests for their livelihood worldwide. So I can imagine a lot, and I can see a tremendous amount of potential. The artists are there, the opportunities are abundant, the needs, whether it's for shipbuilding, canoe building, basketry, or other types of artistry, those skills are there, the needs are there, and certainly we could, with some encouragement in the marketplace, merge these factors together to develop something of a great social responsibility associated with wood culture, where we can really celebrate that wood is good and deal with the health of the forest. So, do you think it's possible? As the optimist that I am, I think it is, and I think listening to everybody today, certainly the abilities are there to do so. So with that, let me just thank you for allowing me to be here today, and I hopefully did that in less than an hour and a half.